Hello and welcome to the SecureX session at DevNet Day. We're going to be talking about developing with Cisco's next generation integration platform. My name is Ben Greenbaum. I'm with Cisco's Security Integrations Group. You can find me on Twitter very rarely at SecondSite, and we're going to be talking about a number of things today. We're going to go through a brief introduction. What is SecureX? What is it for? We're going to go over some feature highlights that are going to be most relevant as we continue to talk about developing with SecureX. We're going to quickly go over the API model, and then we're going to get into some details and demos of SecureX Threat Response and SecureX Orchestration and how you can benefit from the available development opportunities that each of those offer. I'm going to leave you last off with some resources that you can use to learn more. So let's get started with a bit of backstory on SecureX. What is SecureX? We don't have time to go deep into what SecureX is all about, but here's a very brief overview so that we're at least all starting on the same page. SecureX is a pluggable software backplane into which all of your Cisco security gear can be integrated, as well as many third-party applications. It brings you a unified, coordinated, corroborated, and orchestrated experience that ties together global threat intelligence from multiple sources, local security context from your on-premise and cloud sensor technologies, and response capabilities from all of your security controls, all ready to be leveraged via a powerful API and built-in advanced automation options. It helps you get better security outcomes using less time and effort than you're spending now, and it's free with purchase of any qualifying SecureX-capable Cisco product. Sound good? I thought so. Let's get started. Now we're going to do a brief tour of the main features of SecureX. The top-level SecureX capabilities and benefits are threat response for fast investigation and remediation. This is based on Cisco Threat Response. If you're already familiar with Threat Response, you know what this is. Playbook automation to reduce those manual workflows. This is based on existing technology called Action Orchestrator. If you're familiar with Action Orchestrator, then you're already very familiar with SecureX orchestration. Third-party integrations for enhanced visibility and response capabilities in your environment using your existing tool set. Secure sign-on for seamless user experience across different products. Customizable dashboards to track detailed and important metrics that are useful for your specific job roles and responsibilities and team structures. And a ribbon feature to share context and capabilities between all the teams in your environment and to allow you to work across tools very seamlessly. For the rest of this session, we're going to focus primarily on the first three because that's where the real development opportunities lie in SecureX. And we're going to talk first about SecureX Threat Response. Now, SecureX Threat Response includes threat intelligence, the ability to enrich your investigations with threat intelligence data from other Cisco security products, Cisco Talos, third-party integration sources, your own private intelligence, all brought together to deliver quick answers in those situations where time is of the essence. You get the relations graph, the very intuitive display that allows you to visualize the threat and its organizational impact, the chain of events that led to the situation, and get an at-a-glance verdict for all of the observables that you're investigating through this highly visually intuitive graph. The incident manager that allows you to triage, prioritize, track, and respond to high-fidelity alerts through the built-in manager and even perform some automated triage for you, helping you reduce that overhead and burden of there being so many alerts from so many different security products. And of course, the ability to, right there in the interface where you're doing your investigation, take powerful response actions across a broad portfolio of security controls in your environment. SecureX Orchestration brings you a low-code approach. It's a high-performance tool, but it requires very little development skill to actually put together advanced workflows. You do get some out-of-the-box workflows built by Cisco experts. You get the ability to import and export workflows from trusted sharing partners that you may have, ISACs or certs and whatnot, all done through a convenient drag-and-drop interface. You can create your own workflows leveraging that intuitive interface and all of the security tools that you've got already integrated. You've got event and intent-based automation triggers. Things can be kicked off automatically, or they can be set in motion by an analyst. You can also work in approval so that a workflow can be triggered automatically, but the first step, or perhaps the later step, is to seek approval from a human operator before continuing with all or parts of that workflow. And you get the ability to have runtime visibility into the status of your workflows. Did it execute properly? What did it do? What triggered it? What happened the last 5 times that it ran? And so on. All very powerful tools available to you in orchestration. So let's dive into the SecureX development opportunity space. And let's start with a look at the API model itself. SecureX is API aggregation at work. SecureX in the middle there is using the APIs of all the different global data sources, local data sources, control technologies, and of course technologies that may offer two or all three of these options. That's API aggregation. We learn all these APIs so that you don't have to. But we've also got the power of API relaying. You've got the SecureX engine using all of these APIs for you, and SecureX itself has an API. And in fact, it's that API that drives the user interface. So if you're an operator using this user interface, you are in fact using the API behind that. And the API is driving the SecureX engine to use all of those other APIs on your behalf. But wait, you might be thinking, can I skip straight to using the API? And the answer is yes, absolutely you can do that. And that's what we're going to talk about for the remainder of this session. And what it actually breaks down like inside SecureX is that you've got these two main components. You've got threat response and you've got orchestration. And they each tie into technologies via separate mechanisms. It could be the same technology on the back end, but it would have to be tied into each of these things separately. And those technology sets do not have to overlap entirely or at all. You can have one set of technologies tied into threat response and then an only slightly overlapping set of technologies tied into SecureX orchestration. And in fact, in most cases, that's probably how it's going to work. And of course, these two technologies can communicate to each other over their APIs, and they each communicate to this combined SecureX API, which in turn is then what you have access to. And this is all included with purchase of any SecureX capable product. So as soon as you've got even one Cisco firewall, or as soon as you've got AMP for endpoints, even on just 10 endpoints, you get access to all of this capability, both of these powerful APIs, through one SecureX combined API that in turn grants you access to every technology that you've got tied in to either one of these. Now we're going to go into a bit of a deep dive into the two main areas, and we're going to start with threat response. We're going to talk first about some of the threat response use cases that apply to development. You could write a script that uses threat response to extract observables from arbitrary text. That's usually the first part of an investigation, is you can feed it just a block of text. It could be an email or a website, blog article, advisory, it doesn't matter. And threat response will pick out the observables from that text. Oh, this is a domain name, this is a hash value for a file, this is an email address, this is an IP address, etc. You can use threat response to do quick reputation lookups. Maybe you've got a product that's throwing alerts about an IP address and you want something that can quickly determine, is this an IP address that is known to the general public at large to be malicious for any reasons. You can do those quick and dirty lookups very easily with threat response and tie in all of the information sources that you have configured to be part of your threat response ecosystem. You can use it for threat hunting. You can feed it a list of observables or a list of conditions and say, have you seen this anywhere in my environment? And threat response will again query all of those technologies and come back to you with a coordinated, corroborated response. You can use the API to create incidents in the Threat Response Incident Manager. If you have some third-party system that's throwing alerts or alarms and you want to turn some of those into incidents, you can write something that will do that, that will take the output of that other device and process the information, turn it into an incident in the data format, upload it to Threat Response, and have it be stored for you in your Incident Manager, and then you can process it alongside all of the other incidents that you have there. You can use the Threat Response API to take response actions. Again, we learn the APIs so that you don't have to. You want to block a domain in Umbrella automatically, you can do that through Threat Response without having to write something that uses the Umbrella API. Not to pick on Umbrella, the same is true for AMP and adding files to quarantine lists. The same is true for even adding IPs to block lists in Firepower, for example. Isolating a host using AMP for endpoints. Any of the other response features that are going to become available in the near future. You can do all of that through Threat Response, just with the one API, the one set of credentials, etc. And you can add unsupported data sources. Now, what does that mean? If a data source is unsupported, it's not supported. Well, that's true. It might not be supported, but we're rolling out a new capability that allows you to add data sources and even response technologies to threat response all on your own. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. So the first thing I'm going to show you is a script that I wrote in about an afternoon as a not great developer, and both of those things show, but it's very simple. I'm going to start by showing you the source file, taloskarkov.txt, and it is nothing more than just the text from a Talos blog article. Okay, so I have this text file sitting on my local system. I'm now going to pipe it through this Python script that I wrote that uses the threat response API. I've got a couple of verbose flags so that it tells us more about what it's doing than it normally would. And I've specified my client credentials in a file so that I don't have them on the command line for you. Here we go. So we're piping that file through the threat response API. It's picked out 16 unique observables out of all those lines of text, and it's now looking up for each of them to find out, do we have any verdicts? And yes, we found a bunch of verdicts. Different systems have told us that they have judgments and verdicts on these observables. And so now I'm going to ignore the clean observables. Snort.org was listed in the blog article. It's clean. I'm not going to worry about that. But I'm going to investigate the rest of them and see if they've been seen in my environment. And it turns out, yes, one of them was seen a great many times in my environment. And at the very end, it generates some email alert content. Out of the 16 observables in that blog article, one of them has been seen in my environment 100 times by my NGFW, and we've got one verdict on it. Now I can examine this in more detail by the link that's at the bottom there, which will then put me directly into threat response with an investigation on that single IP. Very quick and dirty way to take literally any arbitrary text and see if it contains any observables that have been seen in my environment. Now I'm going to show you something else. This is the actual blog article. This is the same blog article from which the text in my previous example was taken. You just saw me process the same blog article with that Python script. This time, we're going to open the SecureX Threat Response Browser plugin. Like the Python script, this is another API client, but it lives in the browser. I already hit the button to find observables in the page, and sure enough, it did, finding all the same ones. And then it sends those back to threat response to look up their verdicts so that it can show them to me intuitively via these color-coded icons. But in addition, for each observable, it asks threat response, hey, what can Ben's collection of integrated products do with this kind of thing? And so we see here on a file, I have various actions available to me. I can look at this sample in ThreatGrid. I can look at it in Umbrella. I can do various things with it in AMP. I can look up its file trajectory. I can search for records of this hash. I can add this hash to various custom detection lists that I've set up in AMP. And I can investigate this in threat response. So I can take response actions. I'm going to add this to my quarantine list. And I see that that worked. And I'm going to take this domain here at the bottom. And I'm going to block this domain in Umbrella. I haven't gone to Umbrella, I haven't gone to AMP, I haven't even gone to Threat Response, I haven't even gone to the SecureX portal. But because I have this API client with me right in my browser that in turn has access to all my security tools, everywhere I go on the web, I'm still right where I found out about this threat in the first place, and I've already taken some mitigating steps. And in this example, it was a Talos blog article, but it could have been anything. It could have been another advisory, it could have been the console of some other web manageable security product. For anything that's in my browser, I can do the same thing. That's the power of API aggregation. That's the power of API relaying. That's the power of a unified and interlocking security architecture backed by the SecureX platform. And access to it and to that API is included in the license of every SecureX capable Cisco product. So, having seen a couple examples of what the API can do, we're now going to go over modules. In threat response, modules are the name for the pluggable code bits that talk to all of those SecureX capable intelligence or sensor or control technologies. You've seen this diagram before. These are modules. Relay modules are a new and exciting thing of interest to the DevNet audience. In a relay module, you are contacting a relay server. A relay server simply translates from any arbitrary third-party data model and API to our Cisco threat intelligence model and the SecureX APIs. It's a go-between, it's a translator, a liaison between arbitrary third-party things and SecureX. And we don't even have to know or care what they are. We've written several. for you to use, but you can also write your own. The ones that we have up on GitHub are currently implemented in AWS Lambda. You don't have to do that. You can write your own to use some extra box you have sitting in your DMZ or whatever it is that you want to use. Some other cloud service provider, however you want to do it. The ones up in GitHub use AWS Lambda, and below on the slide, bottom right, you can see a list of the ones that are currently available on GitHub. These are all third-party information sources that you can tie in to threat response by using the relay module code that's already available for you to download on GitHub. This is a very new feature. We're going to be publishing a lot more information about this in the coming months, but I wanted to give you a heads up, and you can look at the resources that I'm going to be providing at the end of this segment to find out where you can learn more about that now and in the near future. Very exciting stuff. We're now going to talk about SecureX orchestration, the other half of the development surface available to you in SecureX. The use cases for orchestration would be a very long list. This is not exhaustive, but it's a decent start. You can do things like incident and ticket management using third-party systems or the SecureX Incident Manager. You can do automated threat hunting. You can take arbitrary data sources and just find out if any of these symptoms or evidence have been seen in your environment. You can use it to do phishing investigations. Set up a phishing reporting email address at your organization. Train your employees or even your customers to send suspected phishing messages to that box, and then you can have a series of automated actions that are taken on the back end by receiving and reading and processing that email. You can manage load balancing. You can check the status of different technologies. If the status hits certain thresholds, you can take automated actions, spin up another VPN head end, or add another VM to the web server farm, whatever you want to do. Not even necessarily a security thing, but this system, SecureX, actually does have applications outside the specific world of the Security Operations Center. There are things we can do for NetOps and for IT ops as well. You can use it to collect threat intelligence. You can use it to bring information in from multiple different resources. Does this sound like threat response work? Maybe a little bit, but this is another way that you can do it, perhaps in a more automated fashion. You've got something that spits out a new set of threat intelligence every 24 hours. We'll use this to go get it and collect it. And then you can use threat response to query that collection. Okay, you can use orchestration to find and report on vulnerabilities. You can use it to run orbital queries. You can use it to use other systems to detect version numbers of software and compare that inventory against a list of vulnerabilities that you may collect from a different source of information. You can use it to group manual responses together. Maybe you still want something to be a manually initiated process. You don't want the person to have to go click on each and every individual little thing in that chain. Make it all one workflow, have them click the button to say go, and off it goes and does the whole thing. And you can use it to onboard new users. You have a lot of tasks that need to happen when a new user or enters the organization from a security perspective. You can have one workflow that kicks all that off, and it can even be tied into your HR or identity management system to do some portion of this automatically, and you can tie in user approval so that nobody runs away with that process, but you still have much less work to do as a result in that process. So now for a demo, let's have a look at SecureX orchestration. From the SecureX dashboard, I just click the orchestration button there, and that loads me into the orchestration workspace. Here I see a list of the workflows that have already been configured in my environment. I can also click new workflow and just add another workflow. It shows up this blank workspace here. I've got workflow options here. I can give it a name. I can give it a description if I really wanted to. I have some additional options. I can assign variables, can add a variable to the workflow. We'll make this a string variable and we'll call it string var because we're feeling very creative right now. Local scope, default value of string. And we'll save that variable. We can now use this in any of the actions that we may bring into this workflow. So let's start with simply find a string. I'm going to drag the find string activity out into the workspace. We click it and we can give it various parameters. We're going to use the source string from the local variable that I just created. I'm going to save that there. And now it's going to try to find a string. And in that string, it's going to try to find the ring. We just made a workflow. I mean, obviously, it's a very simple workflow and not very useful, but this is the level of coding experience that's required. Like, some basic familiarity with the concepts is great, but I mean, it is drag and drop. We can set additional variables afterwards. Okay, there's logic here. We can have various kinds of conditions. We have some flow control. And I'm going to set a condition of, if my previous activity, the find string, if it succeeded, and there's my condition 1. So now I can rename this. And then I can drag other things in here. Maybe I only want to set the variable if that was successful. So I just dragged it over there. Okay, and I can put other conditions over here. I can add more conditions. It can be more like a case statement if I want. I can drag anything from over here, even other workflows. So my workflows can be built into other workflows. You can use this in a foundational sense to make building blocks and then to build upon those blocks, and then you can put buildings together. It becomes very, very powerful very, very quickly. But we're going to exit out of this. I mean, that's how difficult it is to put together a workflow. Not very difficult at all. We're going to look at a slightly more involved workflow. This workflow does largely what our 2 previous examples did. Okay, we're going to fetch and clean a blog post from Talos. We're going to do some processing on the content. We're going to generate an access token for threat response. We're going to set the variable for the token itself. We're going to call the inspect API to pull all the observables out of that blog content. We're then going to check and see if we got results. Were there any observables? If not, then we're done. If there were, we're going to put them into a table. We're then going to deliberate on those observables. We're going to create a table up front for the deliberation results, and then we're going to check threat response for the deliberation verdicts on all of those observables. For each of the observables, see, for each, we've got more flow control there. For each of those observables, we're going to check to see if it was suspicious. If it was suspicious, we're going to add this result to the table. We're going to generate some JSON around that using a custom Python script. We're going to update the observable variable that we're building. At the end of this, once we're done all the for eaches, we're going to get the count of all the records in the table. And if any of them were suspicious, we're going to continue. But if not, then we're going to exit and be done. So now we've got some observables that were suspicious. And for each one of those, we're going to do some additional enrichment. We're going to make sure that our threat response token is still valid. If it's expired, we're going to make a new one. We're going to take our list of modules and convert that to a table. We're going to see if there were any enrichment results. And for each module that had results, we're going to get the sightings. For some of the modules, we may not care. This is kind of unusual, but this is just an artifact of our lab environment. But if it's not one of the modules that we're tying into this lab, then we're going to skip it for now. Or if it had no sightings, then we're going to skip that module anyways. Then we'll convert all the sighting data to usable text. Is there any sighting text? If yes, we're going to append this to the total module sightings. And if there are results, we're then going to create a casebook in threat response. We're going to grab the casebook ID, and we're going to post that in a message to a WebEx Teams room. Now, there was a little coding involved in this example because we did write a little bit of Python, but the majority of this was just drag and drop, give things labels, decide what variable it is that we want to plug into a thing or put the result into when it's done. That is the power of SecureX orchestration. Here we are back in the edit workspace working on our demo workflow from earlier in this session. And over here on the left, you see a list of adapters. Now, adapters in orchestration are very similar to modules in threat response. They allow you to talk to outside technologies. We've got adapters for threat response. We've got adapters for threat grid, WebEx Teams, Cloud Center Suite, plenty of third-party things as well. But you can't write your own. In SecureX orchestration, you can't write and add your own adapters. And so the question comes up, can I talk to arbitrary third-party services? Can I leverage third-party services that don't already have a dedicated adapter for them? And the answer is, if REST, then yes, because it rhymes better than if REST, then true. But the fact is that there are already adapters in SecureX orchestration that make this fairly easy. We're going to go to web service at the bottom left there. We're going to take HTTP request out. We're going to drag it into our process. And now on the right, we get to edit the properties. We can use the default workflow target. Now a target is what this operation is going to talk to. So similar to a module in threat response, for example, if you set up an ESA module, you then decide which device that module is going to talk to. And if you have two SAs, you could even set up two ESA modules and each one would have its own target. It's a little bit similar here. We did not specify any targets that live within the workflow itself, but we can specify a target for this request specifically. And we have a list of the targets that exist for me to choose from. I'm going to add a new target right now dynamically. We're going to set no account keys to true. Account keys are how we store credentials that go with our targets. I'm not going to bother doing that for this demo, but you could. We're going to select HTTP. We're going to give it a host name. We're going to choose a port and a path. And there we go. Now that we have a target selected, we can add some additional material. Relative URL, so we entered the main path for the API in the previous step when we defined the target. We're going to add a relative URL. We can type something out here, or we can leverage a variable. So let's grab that workflow variable string var that we created earlier. And in fact, let's move this whole block up here. So now if find string is not successful, we're going to take that variable in which we did not find the string ring, and we're going to look it up in this API that we just defined and are using for the first time. We can specify headers and accept strings and a user agent. The short version of this story is that there's quite a lot you can do to incorporate arbitrary third-party services into your workflows. All right, that about wraps it up. I'm going to leave you with some resources that you can use to continue learning about SecureX and the ways that you can build tool sets that leverage it. I'm going to start with directing your attention to the integration documentation that's available at cs.co/securex_integration_workflows. Pretty long for a URL shortcut, I realize. Capitalization counts, so just like that or it won't work. And what you'll find there is tips and tricks and getting started advice and some high-level overview information about the APIs for both threat response and orchestration. Additionally, I encourage you to use the documentation and the prototyping tools that are in the UI. We've got excellent API documentation. We've got Swagger that you can use to test out API calls right there in your browser. Very helpful resource. And then we've got GitHub. github.com/Cisco security, and you're going to find some code samples. You're going to find the official Python module for threat response. You're going to find examples of those serverless relay modules that we were talking about earlier. You may even at some point find some workflows for orchestration. Threat response specific resources. There's a DevNet microsite at developer.cisco.com/threat response. All kinds of tutorials and information there to get you started on the threat response side of the house. And as well, we've got some DevNet learning labs at cs.co/ctr-api-labs. Once again, capitalization counts. And there you're going to find about 2 hours worth of training material that will actually get you rolling up sleeves and cutting code to work with the SecureX Threat Response API. And on the SecureX orchestration side, SecureX orchestration is based on an older tool known as Action Orchestrator. And so right now, I'm just going to send you to the Action Orchestrator YouTube video playlist at cs.co/AO videos, and the Action Orchestrator docs at that longer URL there on the bottom, where you're going to find all kinds of material that pertains more to Action Orchestrator than the SecureX orchestration specific implementation thereof. But it's all good foundational knowledge, and the vast majority of it does still apply. And the goal of all of this and of spending the last few minutes together is that eventually we're going to get to a point where you are that skilled API operator on the bottom right, making use of all of threat response and orchestration features, working them into your own tool sets in your SOC, or allowing your product to be part of the SecureX family. Thank you very much. I do appreciate your attention and your interest in SecureX and in working with the API that's available. Enjoy the rest of DevNet Day. Thanks again.